Members of the BVI Chamber of Commerce and Hotel Association got an in-depth update about the new Internal Revenue Service, the IRS regulation, and its implications for the territory. The new rules added to the U.S. tax code in January 2012 means that credit card processing companies must collect and verify the tax identification number and legal name associated with that number for each merchant. Speaking at the BVI CCHA meeting held at the Maria's by the Sea restaurant on February 6th, American Express representative Shahar Ziv said American Express is visiting all First Caribbean International Bank locations in the region to inform the bank's staff about the new Internal Revenue Service regulation regarding overseas payments by U.S. credit card companies.
So the first question that we always get is, well, this is an IRS regulation, you're talking about U.S. merchants, why does this affect me? And I think it's a very valid question. Unfortunately, the IRS has written this regulation in a very broad way. And in addition to covering U.S. merchants, it also covers merchants who conduct business outside the U.S. under a set of three different conditions. So if you're a merchant conducting business outside the U.S., there are three conditions that would trigger you to have to submit documentation to the IRS. The first two probably don't apply to anyone in this room, and they are if a merchant has a U.S. address or if the merchant maintains a U.S. bank account. The third trigger, and this is the one that affects a lot of people in the Caribbean, especially here, is if the merchant transacts in U.S. dollars. So if you settle in U.S. dollars with a U.S. acquirer, and we'll talk about that in a second, you would have to submit documentation to the IRS that would exempt you from this regulation.
The backup withholding provision of the law went into effect on January 1st, 2013, requires the processing company to withhold 28% of the merchant's future payment on credit card transactions if there is a discrepancy between the merchant's tax identification number and the legal name.
This regulation took place as of January 1st, 2013, and it basically said that any merchant who hasn't submitted documentation to American Express by January 1st, American Express would be forced to, and this is the IRS forcing us as American Express, to withhold 28% of the gross card payment transactions.
All non-U.S. businesses in the Virgin Islands and across the region which have not complied with the new IRS regulation are subject to withholding fees. So far, American Express appears to be the only credit card company enforcing the law, and some hotels in the Caribbean countries have had the withholding fees levied on them.
So I want to take a step back and talk about who this actually applies to, because I know there's a lot of confusion there. So I use the term U.S. merchant acquirer, and I'll give an example. So American Express is a U.S. acquirer. So when you sign a contract to accept American Express, you are signing that contract directly with American Express as a U.S. banking entity. So in that sense, the American Express is a U.S. merchant acquirer. We work with a lot of different banking partners in the Caribbean, and you probably work with them locally as well. And when they go, and when you sign up to accept American Express through one of our banking partners, you are still signing the contract directly with American Express. And therefore, we would be subject to that regulation. Visa, MasterCard, from everything that I understand, they operate a little differently. When one of the banks goes to you to sign up to accept Visa and MasterCard, you are signing an agreement not with Visa, MasterCard, but the contract that you sign is actually with the bank, whether that's Scotiabank, First Caribbean. Therefore, as you may have seen, when it comes to Visa and MasterCard transactions, they are not currently governed by this regulation because the acquirer is a local Caribbean bank and not a U.S. acquirer like American Express.
Shahar Ziv's visit came just weeks after the Bahamas Hotel and Tourism Organization flagged the United States' new tax regulation as a potentially crippling development that could have far-reaching implications for hoteliers and tourism attractions across the Caribbean.